to a brand new hour of CBS Sports HQ. I'm Haley Sutton. Less than 100 days away from the start of the NFL season, which also means we're building the excitement towards college football. Last year, the freshly expanded Big Ten sent 4 teams to the newly expanded CFP. That included Ohio State, who won it all. And this year, the conference returns to CBS, and we get a look at the schedule. It's all headlined by a trip to State College for Penn State in Week 1 with that action underway on August 30th. We also have stops in Eugene, West Lafayette, and Lincoln all through the first 4 weeks of the season. You can catch those marquee Big Ten matchups every Saturday, 3:30 Eastern on CBS. And for more of the excitement surrounding the Big Ten on CBS, we welcome in Adam Zucker, host of College Football Today. Adam, we are so excited. Of course, we know that this gets underway in Week 0 in Hawaii. But after that, we get Penn State. I'm curious, though, what matchups are you excited about ahead of the season?
Oh, my goodness. I mean, Haley, we look at this schedule when it comes out, and we hope for certain games that we might get. And my guys from College Football Today and from Inside College Football, we get spoiled, and we get to go to a couple games a year, you know, if not also the Big Ten championship game in those years. So, you know, I'm dying to see where we go this year. Last season, we got to go to Michigan and USC and see those campuses, see those legendary stadiums. I would love to go back to either of those, but I'd also love to go to Nebraska. And seeing that we have Michigan against Nebraska is really compelling, especially with those young quarterbacks in that game in Week 4. I would love to go for the first time to Oregon or Washington as well, if it should work out that way. So a lot of these matchups that we know we're going to have are awesome, including the Apple Cup that we also get Week 4 with Washington State. And then I just kind of look at the Big Ten grid, and you know, I'm still getting accustomed to this new, bigger Big Ten, because a lot of these games feel like bowl games when they happen. Ohio State, Oregon last year was legendary. It determined a lot, although Ohio State, of course, got their revenge later. But you have Michigan going to USC. You have Ohio State at Washington this year. Penn State, Oregon are going to have a Big Ten championship game rematch. So there's so much meat on this schedule, especially if some of the sleeping tigers in this conference can rise up again.
I love that you pointed out as well that the Big Ten is now literally coast to coast. So you've got a lot of real estate to work for when you're looking at some of those games. Of course, we also have our eye on Week 3. That's when we see USC taking on Purdue. And of course, we're excited for the game, Zook, but I think we're even more excited to hear Gary Danielson, on the call. It's his last one for his alma mater, his final season as our lead analyst. Just what can you say about the excitement of that game, but more specifically Gary and what he's done for your team over the years?
Well, you know, no offense to the Purdue logo, or more importantly, the Pate State logo, but Gary is the locomotive of college football on CBS now, knocking past 20 years. He has ushered us not only into the Big Ten era, but into the CFP era, and has been the voice overseeing legendary moments, stars being born. But you think of the kick six when Alabama only had fat guys on the field was his line, and the prayer of Jordan-Hare, and then, you know, Tim Tebow, Cam Newton, Johnny Manziel, all of the Saban years, all of the crazy moments with Vern Lundquist, and now, of course, with Brad Nessler and our friend Jenny Dell. And I actually can't wait to see, because Gary is wicked smart. He's so smart, and he works so hard. And some of it you get on the air, of course, but there's stuff at dinners and events where he just whips out the yellow notepad, and you just hope he didn't prepare a line for you. I cannot wait to see his parting shots. I can't wait to see what Craig Silver dials up for him at that Purdue game you're talking about, but especially as we near the end with Army-Navy and then the Sun Bowl, you know, what Jenny has cooked up on the sideline with special guests. I just think of the way he bid Vern goodbye, and now it'll be Brad Nessler's turn to say adios to Gary. And he's just been awesome to me. You know, it's been a decade now since I sat in that chair in Studio 43, and I just remember my initial conversations with him. And like I said, when I first started rambling on with this answer, you know, he's been our leader, and he's been that freight train, that locomotive for us.
Listen, I gave you a very hard task of describing what Gary Danielson means to us in a very short period. I think you did a great job, Adam. We certainly appreciate the time. We look forward to catching you during college football season. All right, here it is, your first 4 weeks of the season, Big Ten on CBS, all kicking off at 3:30 Eastern. Talked about the expectations for James Franklin and Penn State. They'll get it going on August 30th. Of course, pinging around the country for this newly expanded Big Ten for all of these games that we are so excited to see. Here's some other ones we want to point your attention to. Again, join us every Saturday, 3:30 Eastern, for these games on CBS. The action featuring a trio of primetime matchups. All 3 Commander-in-Chiefs Trophy games also on CBS. We'll get a triple header on November 1st that will see some of those service academies. And, of course, as Adam mentioned, everyone's favorite Tony the Tiger Sun Bowl later in the season. Thankful for Adam Zucker setting the table for us. We now welcome in our quarterback, Danny Kanell, to sort of dive into some of the matchups we can expect with this new CBS schedule release. DK, it all starts in week 0. We have to make sure we get that distinction between Stanford and Hawaii. Frank Wright, in his first year as a head coach in college, is going to make the trip to Hawaii. So the vibes feel good there. But when you think about the short leash he's on there, just the 1-year contract for Frank, what are your expectations for him as he tries to get back to the NFL?
Ooh, man. Haley, this is a tall task for Frank Reich to take over a program where Troy Taylor was let go by Andrew Luck, the legend of the program, who just takes over in this, general manager type of role. And this is a program that's been, not that long ago, David Shaw and Jim Harbaugh had this team at 10 wins, 11 wins, with Andrew Luck when he was playing there. They've had 4 seasons in a row at 3 wins. That is a brutal start. And once again, the expectations are low. So if you want to try to, get past that, get to 4 wins, 5 wins, maybe even make a bowl, this game becomes imperative for Frank Reich to get off to a good start on. So I think this is a big game for them, a must-win type of situation where they're only about a field goal favorite going out to the island to take on Hawaii. But I do think for Psyche to keep the team kind of bought in around some of the adversity they've had to face, I think it's critical that they get a big win in week 0 to start off the season right here on CBS.
If nothing less, just sort of reset the morale, because it feels like that's been at an all-time low over the last couple of years when it comes to Stanford. If we jump ahead to week 1 of the season, we get Penn State on the schedule. They'll take on Nevada, which I say is a test, not because maybe the competition will be a test, but last year, Danny, was the year that everyone thought James Franco's squad was going to break through. They didn't do it last year, so how do you set the tone in that week 1 game against Nevada?
Well, Haley, I don't think there's a player in the country with more pressure on him than Drew Aller, Penn State's quarterback, based on he's the only guy really at the significant national championship contenders that's returning, but also because they're bringing back his entire backfield. Both backs are deciding to come back to Penn State to do something special. They went out and brought in Jim Knowles to kind of keep improving that defense, which has been really incredible, and they are sort of a trendy pick to win the Big Ten because of what they brought back. So I think this is a huge year for Penn State. I do think it's an opportunity. I know the jokes abound out there about Penn State. Sure, they made the playoffs, but they still haven't beaten a top 5 team because they had a favorable, seeding and bracket in the playoffs. But I do think this is one of those kind of tune-ups where you would like to see them with a solid performance against a team where they probably are 2-touchdown or more favorite, and you kind of use it to build up the confidence and use it to build up some momentum going into their Big Ten slate later in the season.
It's interesting you mentioned Drew Aller and the offense of Penn State. There's a great article up on CBSSports.com right now detailing the strengths and the weaknesses of the schedule. And one of the things that Bud Elliott talked about when it comes to Penn State was the fact that the offense might be better than the defense this year when it comes to Penn State. So just something to keep our eye on there as the season gets underway. If we jump ahead to week 2, that's when we get the Oregon Ducks. They had a pretty successful season in year 1 in the Big Ten. We know it all came crashing down against Ohio State very early in the expanded CFP. But they'll get the action going against Mike Gundy and Oklahoma State. What are the expectations for Dan Lanning and Oregon this year, Danny?
Haley, I think people are sleeping on the Ducks. I mean, this is the team that won the Big Ten in their first year in the conference last season. But as you mentioned, everybody seems to forget about that because of the blowout loss to Ohio State out in the Rose Bowl in the playoffs. And I know they have to replace Dylan Gabriel, and they've had the luxury of playing veteran quarterbacks the last few times because they had Bo Nix before him, who came in as a veteran with a lot of experience. Now you've got you've got Moore coming in there, Dante Moore coming in from UCLA, where he sat behind Dylan Gabriel, got to learn But if you remember, Haley, he was a highly sought-after recruit who ended up going to UCLA, decided to kind of take a breather a little bit. And whether it's him or Austin Novosad as the new quarterback, they're going to be surrounded by a wealth of talent. That's one thing that Dan Lanning has done a phenomenal job crushing both the recruiting landscape, but also the transfer portal. I think that's a team to watch out for in the Big Ten that people are kind of just flying under the radar. It's Ohio State, potentially go back to the national title. It's Penn State people are picking because they have the returning. I think people are sleeping on Oregon, but this will be a good challenge against them from a Big 12 team that I kind of don't know what to expect. Mike Gundy always had a perennial contender, one of his worst seasons last year as a head coach at Oklahoma State. I think they'll be much better this year, and it could be a good challenge for Oregon, early in the season.
Will certainly be a challenge for Oregon. They have just 5 players returning to that lineup this year, so a big test for Dan Lanning against one of the longest tenured head coaches in the game. All right, Danny, we got to jump ahead to week 4 because that's where we find Michigan making their Big Ten season opener on the road against Nebraska. They will do it without their head coach, Sharon Moore. Of course, we know serving a 2-game self-imposed ban going back to the sign stealing scandal from a year ago. And it's interesting with Michigan, Danny, because it feels like it doesn't matter how good or how bad they ever are on the field. We're always worrying about this off-the-field stuff. So if you're Michigan going into this season, how do you separate the narrative behind your program with going out and playing winning football?
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, or however way you want to look at it, they're kind of used to this, right? They won a national championship where you didn't have Jim Harbaugh, your head coach, for 6 games. Like, that is insane when you think about it. But I think they kind of channel that energy that they had 2 years ago when they won the title, which is us against the world. Sometimes that adversity, having a coach who's, the self-imposed, suspension that you mentioned, that can bring a group closer together. I think the question marks on the offense are what fascinates me. The Michigan, as bad as last year felt because they had the worst quarterback room in the country last year, they still salvaged the season by beating Ohio State and then their bowl game beating Alabama with what I think is once again going to be a really good defense. But I think they're going to be upgraded at quarterback, whether it's Bryce Underwood, the superstar $12 million quarterback coming in from high school, or they have a pretty good veteran in Mikey Keene, who's played a lot of college football, who can kind of settle things down. That, to me, is what I'll be curious at this point in the season. Who is playing quarterback? Does Bryce Underwood comfortable enough to become the starter, or do they go with the seasoned veteran and Keene, who kind of keeps things a little bit, safer, more, a safer pick that won't make as many mistakes? But I do think one thing that Sharon Moore will do, even if he's not going to be there on the sidelines, this is going to be a team that once again wants to get back to physical football, where they'll try to run the football, take the load off their quarterback's shoulders. And I do think they get better quarterback play. And this is a big challenge for Nebraska, too. Nebraska, that sea of red is going to be rocking. They have big expectations for Dylan Raiola in year 2. Matt Rule kind of under fire somewhat. I don't want to say hot seat because he's taken a step forward, but he needs to take another step forward where it could be a huge signature win from them if they're able to knock off Michigan.
I'm curious how Matt Rule feels about the self-imposed ban of Sharon Moore not being available during his game, but I guess we'll have to wait and see how he feels about that. DK, before we let you go, obviously we've talked about a lot of scenarios here. There's so many more headlines going in. I'm curious from your perspective, though, which program has the most to prove going into 2025?
From this list, I would say probably Nebraska, the team that we just talked about. And they're going to be featured twice here, on CBS as far as the matchups that were released today. Mentioned this is a program that when I was playing was a dynasty program. They won back-to-back national championships in 94, 95. They were a perennial contender, and they've just kind of fallen off, and they've been through multiple coaches, but now they've invested in Matt Rule. They bring him in. They invested in Dylan Raiola, and their expectations are we want to get back to the upper tier of the Big Ten and the upper tier of college football. I think they're one of the teams with the most to prove. Michigan's been there and done that. Oregon's been there and done that. Washington even has been there and done that. Nebraska is that team from that list that I think has to prove it, that they belong in the upper tier of college football again. And if they don't, I think the question marks start to build and the cries from the Nebraska faithful will start to increase. They'll get a little bit louder and a little bit hotter from that rule.
So much to follow, and to think we're just about 86 days away from it all getting underway. Danny Kanell joining us here, our quarterback, breaking down the schedule. CBS, your home for Big Ten action in 2025. DK and the Cover 3 podcast crew, plenty to discuss on the next episode. Scan that QR code on your screen to get up to date with the latest college football news.